Okay, you're a historian today, and we are coming to talk more about that now.
Sure.
Um, as a historian, predominantly of African American area of history, uh, what kind of background do you want to give us on that? I mean, what do you want people to know about African American history? Help me with that.
For so long, those of African descent, once again, based on curriculum and based on denial of being able to tell our own story, denial of opportunities and access to things, there's been a dominant narrative, or there's been a string of narratives that have suggested um, those of blacks of African descent are intellectually inferior. They're subhuman. They're impervious to pain. They can take, larger amounts of pain. Um, they they uh, they don't have the capacity to have relationships or to love. They're not human beings, or they're criminals. They're thugs, they're hoodlums, they're ghetto, and so we see that even in academia, those who were deemed as scholars, those who were deemed as historians in the field, pushed forth these false narratives. And there's all types of historical accounts. Um, William Dunning of the Dunning School, and other individuals, white individuals, that spoke about the inferiority of the African race based on their skull capacity and their brain size, and that they're primitive, savage like barbaric individuals. I mean, these are things that were actually pushed out in educational settings and in educational spaces in higher education. And so I'm just a continuation. What has inspired me are the shoulders that I stand on: Carter G. Woodson, Benjamin Quarles, uh, Frederick Douglass, uh, the long list of historians that have come before me: Asa G. Hilliard, uh, Dr. John Henrik Clark, Cheek Anta Diop, so many that have come before me in their own way and in their own lane, whether it was history, whether it was psychology, whether it was education, whether it was archaeology, or whatever it was. They used their skill set as a professional in their area to uplift the race and to uplift um, the African, or those of African descent. And so for me, I like to use my scholarship, my findings and research and history to bring forth humanity and to restore the humanity in terms of how Blacks of African descent are viewed, seen, and treated. And my aim is not just to stop there, even though I consider myself a Black man, I consider myself to be African American, of African descent. I believe that the story that I seek to uncover and the narratives that I'm trying to recuperate are stories that all people can look at, reflect on, and can analyze and apply to their life in the present, in contemporary times. I believe history is instructive, and it can inform us of how we can operate, how we can move and navigate our reality in current times. And so I try to use history as a way to connect people. I try to use history as a vehicle to heal people. And it doesn't mean it's easy work, because when there are certain things ingrained, certain things that are, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I have to be twice as this or twice as that. And there's even been research that has been done where they've taken children, Black children, and have given them a standardized test. And they ask these children questions. And from just asking them what race they identified with, it automatically triggered a response in these children. They got anxious. They had performance anxiety by identifying with that stereotype. They had a hard time uh, putting their best foot forward, taking that test. But it had nothing to do with with where they were intellectually, but it had to do with the stigma. It had to do with the label. It had to do with the stereotype and what had been internalized. And so racial battle fatigue and just the taxation and stereotype threat and all of these types of things a lot of times are leaning on people, especially um, blacks of African descent. And I'm not trying to generalize. I don't want to say that um, that uh, those who consider themselves black are a monolith and that everybody thinks the same and that everybody's experiences are the same. However, even the research supports that history and how we view the past and the stories that have been passed down from generation to generation impact health outcomes. I just came across an article the other day that said racism and day-to-day discrimination in time impacts the memory with marginalized groups and groups that have been uh, 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 done disrespectfully and that have been done wrong when it comes to racism and discrimination and all those types of things. There's even research that even says that those of African descent are more susceptible to stroke and heart disease and kidney issues and all types of uh, um, conditions of the body based on having to deal with this stuff long term. But we a lot of times think, oh, well, it's just hereditary. Oh, it just runs in my family. Oh, that's just the way it is. And no, I would suggest and argue that, well, yes, there are some things that may run in our family. And, you know, uh, there are a lot of different reasons and that lead us to be the way we are in terms of our health and our wellness. But what I would also insert that we oftentimes overlook is the intergenerational historical trauma too that we also have to take into account that is carried over from one generation to the next to the next to the next. And they've studied mice in cages, they've studied Holocaust victims, they've studied Native Americans who have been pushed off the land, they've studied black folk, and the data reveals in all of these different facets that what happens yesterday impacts you today. There's not a hard break from history. So no matter how you try to get over it, how you try to get around it, avoid it, deny it, it's still stored in the brain. It's still stored in the memory. It's still stored in the body. And there's things that you can do to work through that so you can still operate on a high level and all of that. But I would say the first thing we have to do is acknowledge and confront and address that of the past. And a lot of times we don't do that.
Thank you so much for that. And this is why we have people like you to talk to us about history. I think those who run the society are well aware of this.